Detective Sergeant Peter Rawls had not shaved for more than a week, and it was starting to get on his nerves. It wasn't that he had been meticulous about shaving before, far from it, in fact, but he did find, as the days went by, that he resented not having a reason to. It had been more than 2 months since he had last needed to shave, because it had been more than 2 months since he had last been at work, and somehow, without work, he had seen little point in making the effort. Rawls was clipping his bonsai. He was in his happy place. Or at least, the place where he was as happy as he could be under the circumstances. The 2 days of leave that his DI had first suggested had turned into 2 weeks. The 2 weeks had turned into 2 months. He hadn't asked for the time off. He hadn't wanted the time off. But God knew, and Rawls did too, that he had needed it. The trouble was that Rawls didn't like having time off. He didn't like his own company. It gave him time to brood. And wasn't that the reason he had needed time off in the first place? Because he had spent too much time in his own head. He dragged his palm across his cheek, irritated by the noisy stubble, then picked up his pruning shears and forced his fingers into the delicate handles. Rawls didn't exactly fit the profile of a person interested in bonsai. He was tall and broad-shouldered, and at more than 6 foot by the time he was 15, he had developed first a slouch and then a shambling stoop that had stayed with him ever since. He stood in that manner now, his shoulders hunched, as he snipped rapidly at a stunted Chinese elm with the dexterity of a trained hand working from muscle memory. It had been D.I. Washington who had pulled him to one side. He had pressed his skinny fingers into Rawls's considerable bicep and whispered into his ear that he should get his arse into his office right then and there, if he knew what was good for him. Rawls had not resisted, and they had moved together through the open-plan office with the air of a couple of ballet dancers in a well-rehearsed scene. "This has got to stop," Washington had said as the door closed behind them. "Right now, right here, it has to stop." Rawls had nodded. Washington was right. He had gone too close to the edge, and he did have to stop before he tipped himself right over. "You know that I can't let this carry on, don't you?" Washington continued. Rawls had nodded again, but kept his eyes on his shoes, his head low, his brain racing. "Peter!" Washington's face had the look of someone in pain as he spoke. "You have to move on. You can't let it eat at you like this." Rawls had known that he couldn't, that he shouldn't, but he had tried anyway, and every day, instead of feeling better, he had felt a little worse. First, his patience had grown thin, his temper a red line as tight and narrow as a cotton thread, or perhaps more accurately, a fuse in a stick of dynamite. And then he had stopped sleeping. To be fair, he'd stopped trying to sleep, because when he did, his mind had shown him pictures that he had not wanted to see. Pictures of his past, of his future, of his mistakes. His mistake. "I just need a bit more time," he said. "Maybe a couple of weeks off, just to get my head straight." He'd hoped that a couple of weeks would be enough. Truth be told, he'd hoped a couple of days would be enough. But he'd been wrong. He'd needed time to recover, to recharge, but the realization had not come easy. He wasn't the kind of guy who liked to spend too much time in his own head. Washington had fiddled with a book on his desk. "How long do you think you'll need?" Rawls had had no idea. A week? 2 weeks? Who knew? Now, more than 2 months later, he felt rested, but not healed. And if he was being honest with himself, he wasn't entirely certain that one ever really did heal from this sort of thing. It was like an open wound, almost healing over before tearing itself open again. He put the shears down. He needed to get out of the house, to clear his head.